Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We have reached that time of the year when Elia Group publishes a brand new report. And I can tell you that the last few weeks have been challenging, but here we are again.
Yes, and this year we've been focusing on the roadmap to net zero. What could a decarbonized European energy system look like in 2050? Does Europe have sufficient renewable energy sources to fully decarbonize? And how will we balance demand and supply and keep the lights on during longer periods with little wind and sun?
The new Elia Group report addresses this and many other questions, and we have prepared a varied program for you. After a short introduction about the reasons why we undertook this study, we will go over the most important insights with our experts. The study addresses a lot of questions from a European perspective, but it also focuses on Belgium and Germany, the mother countries of Elia Group.
And throughout the event, we will be presenting you with a lot of reactions from external parties, professors, federations, system operators, port authorities, you name it. Some of them were our sparring partners during the preparation of this study, and they have given us advice and challenged us on our results. Based on our insights, we identified a roadmap consisting of different focus points that could help to accelerate the pathway to net zero in an efficient way.
We are going to present these focus points to the Belgian Minister of Energy, Tine van der Straeten. She is our special guest, but that's not all. We also have a live audience. Marlon, what is happening in your corner of the studio?
Yeah, thank you very much. And also a very warm welcome from the Speaker's Corner. As you can see, we've set up a couple of chairs and a couple of guests. As a reminder, we have taken all necessary COVID measures to ensure that all of our guests remain safe and sound throughout the whole event. So why do we have a Speaker's Corner? Well, the main purpose of our new group report is to open up a debate how to reach net zero. Some of our guests here in the Speaker's Corner will react to what's being said in the main studio. We'll have not only representatives from NGOs, but from the industry, from the energy sector, and also the Belgian delegation leader from the recent COP26 negotiations in Glasgow. So see you later on with my very first guest.
Looking forward to you. Thank you, Marlon. Let's invite our first guest on stage. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of Elia Group, Chris Peters. Welcome, Chris. Let's immediately have a look at the foreword of our study. Fit for 55 is just the beginning. That's the title of your foreword. The European Commission, they set targets for 2030. We are looking to 2050. What is the societal relevance of this study?
Well, I think that we all have seen this summer already that climate change is real. So we had the floods in Belgium and in Germany. We had the forest fires in the south of Europe, and across the globe we had many of those kind of events. So it became for everybody clear that it becomes a very urgent matter that we get to net zero. Now the good news is, although this will be a massive challenge, Europe has also understood that with their Fit for 55. That is a consequence of the Green Deal. You see that they really are setting the ambition at the right level. Yeah, we need to reach this net zero at latest by 2050. But of course, a lot of things are still unclear in that program. And so what we try to do here is to get a better understanding from the electricity sector. What does it mean? Because we're one of the key sectors, of course, in decarbonizing society. And therefore, it's important that we try to understand what are elements of that roadmap that we really can achieve that net zero, which we subscribe as the right ambition level to have.
Yeah, we started from the ambition. The road to 2050 is not clear yet. So how did we approach this study then?
Well, we approached this study actually from looking, first of all, at two distinct scenarios. Those distinct scenarios are actually embedded on the 1.5 tech scenario that already was known, so that Europe has developed, which is one of the scenarios that was able to reach that net zero by 2050. And so we made a deviation in two directions. One is more focus on electrification and therefore more focus on electrons. One is more focus on green molecules. And so then we zoom in on the electricity system, and on the electricity system, when then we see, do we have enough energy? So do we have enough energy in terms of renewables to supply all the demand that we have? Secondly, we zoom in on flexibility, which is of course the core of our business. And in that part of the business, we look at, are we able at any moment of time in the time zone of a day, the time zone of a month, the time zone of a season, are we able to keep on the lights? And then, of course, the famous Dunkelflaute, what do we do at moments of stress when we have little renewable production, too little to serve all the demand? How can we survive such a moment?
Yeah, okay, so we have 3 dimensions, we have 2 scenarios. Thank you for this introduction. In a moment, our experts will focus on more details of this study, but let's have a first glimpse of the most important insights from this study.
2050, 30 years from now, we've got just one generation in which to reach net zero. But how can we do it? We investigated what a decarbonised European energy system would look like. In our study, we identified 3 key findings. First, renewable energy should be considered a scarce resource, since Europe has insufficient renewable energy sources to cover its total energy demand in 2050. The good news is, Europe's direct electricity demand can be met, but only if we accelerate renewable expansion by a factor of 3, extend electrification and increase efficiency, and build more interconnectors. However, there will not be enough renewable energy sources to cover indirect electrification, so imports of green molecules from other continents will be required. Our second finding is quite surprising. You don't need large amounts of green molecules to cope with seasonality. To maintain the balance and cope with fluctuations from renewables, you need a well-designed system. We can minimize long-term fluctuations with a good balance between wind and solar energy, avoiding a seasonal mismatch between power supply and demand. We can manage mid-term fluctuations by increasing interconnectors, which reduce the impact of local supply dips, and we can cover daily fluctuations by unlocking end-user flexibility and the potential held in electric vehicles and heat pumps. Third, there will still be times of stress, like in winter, when demand is high but renewable production is low. For a short period of time, we'll need dispatchable capacities. The insights from our study led us to outline a number of key areas to focus on. In close collaboration with other European countries, we will be able to reach net zero, but only if we make tremendous efforts. What we need now are clear policies and the right frameworks to make it happen.
So welcome back, everybody, and let's invite 2 of the experts who led this study. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Karsten Bakker from Elia and Paul Namacher from 50 Hertz. Karsten, Chris already explained the 2 different pathways to net zero, which are outlined in the study. But can you tell us about the differences between those 2?
Yes, indeed. And when you look at the graph here on the screen, you can see actually that there are 2 different pathways that we have defined on the right side. So we have the electricity-focused pathway, where there is really the focus is on direct electrification, whilst in the molecule scenario, we more put the focus on indirect electrification. And that also translates into the increase in electricity demand. So we have an increase in electricity demand in the electricity-focused scenario of about 70% in comparison with today, whilst in the molecule scenario, this is more limited to 35%. However, that's then complemented with, of course, more molecules. But what we do see in both pathways is that there is a massive increase in electricity demand and also in energy efficiency.
So yes, indeed, we see increase of electricity demand, but at the same time, of electrification is a better word, but at the same time we see more energy efficiency. So what does the final energy demand then look like in 2050 under both scenarios?
Maybe before looking into the future, let's have a look at the situation today. So our analysis comprises the European Union, but also the UK, Norway, and Switzerland, and they have a final energy demand of 13 to 14,000 terawatt hours today. 2/3 of it are covered with fossil fuels. And towards 2050 now, we see that this final energy demand will decrease strongly. And you can see also now on this slide that with rising electricity in the final energy demand, with stronger electrification, the final energy demand decreases more. So electrification comes with or leads to energy efficiency, and that's really important to achieve climate neutrality as fast as possible.
So that's about the energy demands, but what does that mean for electricity demands by 2050?
Well, for the electricity demand, actually the difference between the 2 scenarios even increases. There's the direct electricity demand, which is, of course, highest in the electricity-focused scenario, but there's also the indirect electricity demand, which is needed to produce the green molecules, and that comes with conversion losses. So actually, the difference, when you take the total electricity demand, amounts to 1,800 terawatt hours. That's quite a lot. That's 3 times today's electricity demand of Germany, or the equivalent of 400 gigawatts of offshore wind power. So that's massive.
Okay, I hear that more electrification leads to an overall lower energy demand in Europe. It seems to me that's an important finding. We will now hear from Catherine Goldhammer, Managing Director from the Rainer Lemoine Institute, an independent non-profit research institution based in Berlin.
What I like about your study is that you look into 2 different scenarios and you make it only 2 and not so many more. And one scenario is electrification and the other one is green molecules. And that's very important. I think that's exactly where the conversation is going to be over the next few weeks, a month. And what's important for me to stress is that in both of these scenarios, the rapid increase of renewable energy is the key. It's the key to both of them. So direct electrification, but also green molecules will need both the speedy, but also the high capacity increase of renewable energy in Europe.
That's a clear message. We need more renewable generation, both for direct electrification and the production of green molecules. It brings us to the first key insight related to the energy balance. Will Europe have sufficient domestic renewable energy sources to cover its 25 energy demand? Paul, it's over to you.
Yeah, what we actually find in the study that it's unlikely that Europe will have sufficient renewable energy to cover the entire energy demand in 2050. So renewables are to be considered as a scarce resource. The good news is we are with ambitious renewable expansion, we are able to have enough renewables to cover our direct electricity demand, even with strong electrification. But for green molecules, we are likely to rely on imports.
Okay, we have to increase renewables, but how much RES expansion do we need at a European level?
In order to make sure that we can cover the direct electricity demand in Europe in 2050, we have to increase the expansion of renewable energies by at least a factor of 3. So from now on, we have to triple the amount of wind power, of solar power we install each year for the next 3 decades.
That seems to be like a huge challenge. How did you get to this number, Carsten? Can you explain us?
Yeah, and let's grab back to the slide that Paul already presented previously. And so here you can again see those 2 different scenarios with the split between their direct electricity demand and also their indirect electricity demand. And what's important here is that direct electricity demand, that needs to be produced locally, while the indirect electricity demand can also be imported from outside of other countries. And so when we then look, on the other hand, on the supply scenarios, we see that we have defined 3 different scenarios. So we have a scenario where we go 1.5 times faster than the current rate of RES expansion, one where we go 3 times faster, and one where we go 4 times faster. And when we look at the numbers, it's clear, the dotted line, sorry, it's clear that we need to go at least 3 times faster in order to reach the level required for the direct electrification.
Is it likely that we go to a scenario of 4 times?
It's in theory, it's possible, but it's very unlikely. And let's take the example of onshore wind. In the times 4 scenario, we would have vast amounts of onshore going up to 870 gigawatt of capacity, which will be very challenging to achieve, certainly given the challenges that are there on social acceptance, permitting, but also regarding the expansion itself. And so that's why we took the times 3 scenario as a reference in our study.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. It provides us with food for thought. So time to hear from one of our partners. We will hear a statement from Patrick Greichen, the Executive Director of the German think tank Agora Energiewende.
This study that Elia and 50 Hertz have been putting on the table is very welcome. It contains 2 key messages on how to decarbonize the energy sector. First is build lots and lots of renewables. We need to triple wind, solar, and everything else on the renewable side. And the second thing is we need direct electrification. Because that is the cheaper way to decarbonize the energy system compared to molecules. and we have all the technologies available for that. We have the heat pumps, we have the electric cars, we have the electric appliances in industry. So that is the way forward. It does have some challenges and flexibility and grid expansion, but we know how to handle it. So what we need to do in Germany, in Belgium, all over Europe is now to triple wind and solar installation rates and to increase electrification and to move that in a high speed. So the 2020s will be about two key buzzwords: renewables expansion and direct electrification. I'm looking forward to that.
Interesting. Let's focus now once more on the expansion of renewable energy sources. Paul, I assume that not every country in Europe has the potential to accelerate their RES by a factor of 3.
Yeah, that's right. The renewable potential is unevenly distributed across Europe. So in order to share this potential, we will need additional interconnectors. When we look at this map of Europe, we can see that in Central Europe, also in Belgium and Germany, the renewable potential is rather low compared to the national energy demand, whereas the countries in blue, they have an excess of renewable energies that goes beyond their national needs. So we need an international cooperation to make use of this potential, not only in the European Union, but also with countries like UK and Norway, who really have an abundance of renewable potential.
We have some reactions to share with you about the need for international cooperation, as Paul mentioned. These are specifically from partners from countries in Northern Europe. So let's listen to some comments from Energinet and Statnett, the system operators in Denmark and Norway.
The electrification of Europe will not succeed without a tremendous leap in the generation capacity of renewable energy resources. But it will also not succeed unless we move forward and establish interconnectors between countries with ample renewable energy resources and countries with less access to such resources. Energinet and I strongly support the Elia Group commitment to do just that. That's also why we're looking forward to the next steps on the preparation of the interconnectors between the future energy islands in Denmark and Belgium and also Germany.
In order to deliver on the net zero objective of 2050, we need to do a couple of things. We need to have some ambitions, we need to have collaboration, and we need to have decisiveness and tempo in this. The ambition is there. We see ambitions close to 300-400 gigawatts in 2050 in developing of offshore wind in the North Sea. We see that collaboration is highly needed across border and across sectors. And remember, the power system is the new energy system. We have to include different sectors and we have to integrate across borders, and we're doing that already. The ambition started in Norway several years ago, focusing on interconnection across borders. And this year we opened Nordlink in the spring, and we're in the middle of trial operation of North Sea Link between Norway and UK as we speak. The importance of international collaboration and international exchange is highlighted in the Elia Group study. I highly appreciate that and look forward to further collaboration going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you both, Hilde Tonne and Thomas Egebo. Before we move on to the second insight related to flexibility, let's first see if we have received some feedback from some of our guests. Marlon, I see you have one guest with you.
Yeah, thanks, Marie-Laure. Actually, I have my very first guest here. I'm sitting here with Jan van de Putte from Greenpeace Belgium. Great to have you here. But to summarize the first insight related to the energy balance, I would say accelerate RES expansion by a factor of 3, leverage efficiency from direct electrification, and heavily invest in interconnectors. Well, Jan, what's the most important thing you've heard so far from us?
Well, they're all important messages, but what really stands out to us is a very clear message about electrification. Not only to reduce our final energy demand, just it's very efficient to electrify, but also that we need a lot more renewables to supply that electricity. But what I really appreciate about the study is that there are two very clear, distinct scenarios that make the message very clear. If we start to use in the future hydrogen for applications where it is inefficient, then we will lose an enormous amount of energy, and we cannot afford that. It will also mean more CO2. And this comes at this message from Elia comes at the very moment that at the EU level we will move into a discussion about a package about decarbonising gas. We're worried about that package. And so a clear message about electrification is really on the right time.
Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts. We'll get back to you in a minute. In the meantime, we have a statement from Andreas Kuhlmann, the CEO of the German Energy Agency, to share with you.
The roadmap to net zero study is a very important contribution to the discussion we currently have. It addresses the right issues regarding innovation, digitalization, European aspects, and so on. But it also addresses some very important discussions about using molecules in the discussion. And what we see is, yes, we do need molecules, quite a bit actually. We don't know yet where we will get them from, so it is very important to optimize the system in a way that we don't try to use them for the wrong purpose. And here, this study gives some very important hints. I'm very happy to discuss that with you.
Yeah, don't try to use green molecules for the wrong purpose. That's a pretty strong statement. Do you agree, Jan?
Absolutely. And I would like to put it even more strong. We see that there's still a lot of confusion about that. If you look at the efficiency of an electric vehicle for road transport or a fuel cell vehicle on hydrogen, then the electric vehicle is about 3 times more efficient, at least 3 times more efficient. So it's obvious that the right choice, that we should not lose energy on the wrong technology. We have to make the right choices, and the same for heat pumps. It's at least 3 times more efficient than going through burning hydrogen in a boiler. And that's where we are worried, because at this moment we are confronted as NGO already years with a strong lobby from the gas sector to lock in, especially at the distribution level, to lock in the use of fossil gas into the future. And yeah, as Agor Energiewende this week pointed out recently, so most of the distribution grid of gas we don't need in the future. We will have to get rid of it. It's going to become a liability. And this is a hard message to those who have invested in that grid, but it's a very important message to get it right now and to see, okay, where are we going to put our money? We don't have the luxury to invest today in the wrong technologies. We don't have the time and the money for that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jan, so far. And that's all from us until now. Let's go to the second insight on electrification. Back to you.
Thank you, Marlon and Jan. Now, indeed, if we leap forward in time to 2050, how much flexibility is needed to keep the balance between demand and supply? Karsten, what insights can you give us on that topic?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, renewable energies come with some inherent fluctuations. However, what we see is that with a well-built system, you can actually manage these. And that's also why our second insight is quite surprising. First of all, in terms of seasonality, you don't need large-scale seasonal storage in order to match the balance between demand and supply. No, if you have a good expansion of onshore, offshore and solar wind together, then in the end you are able to achieve this balance already. Then next to that, if we look at the medium-term fluctuations, so more coming from wind, there we see that having more interconnectors themselves helps already a lot in terms of these fluctuations that can exist. And then finally, for the short-term fluctuations, so on a daily basis, there we see that the activation of end-user flexibility together with digitalization can already reduce these impacts also significantly.
An interesting overview. Paul, let's zoom into the first one. The need for flexibility on the long term. The production of renewables in winter and summer is completely different. How do we cope with that?
Yeah, everyone knows that the sun is shining brighter in summer, but actually when we look at this figure here, we see that also wind power and also energy demand have a seasonal pattern, which is actually highest in winter. So it's important to have the right mix of renewables to avoid a seasonal mismatch between power supply and power demand. And actually, in our triple expansion scenario, with about 2/3 of wind power and 1/3 of solar power, we achieve this mix that avoids this structural mismatch on the European level.
That's a very important new insight. So you don't have seasonality problems if you have a well-balanced energy mix. What's the consequence of that, Paul?
Well, that means, for example, that you don't need green molecules to act as a large-scale storage for the power system. And that's good because such a storage would come at high storage losses also. But that also means that if you cannot realize this mix on a local or on a national level, which will, for example, be difficult for Belgium, you should interconnect with other countries that have a complementary mix.
Okay, this is over the long term. What about the midterm, Carsten? How can flexibility be covered on a weekly basis?
Yeah, like I said, there we see the role of interconnectors. And Paul already explained a little bit on the first role. So we actually see there a dual role of interconnectors. So next to sharing the renewable potential between countries that are long, so have an excess of renewable energy, and countries that are short, so have a shortage of renewable energy, we also see that they can level out the local supply dips in national demand. And I also have a map here to show it a little bit. So what you can see here is the map of Europe. And the numbers indicate how much production is at those locations at the same time as in Belgium. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but the higher the number, actually, the worse it is, because we don't want to have production at the same time. We want to actually mitigate those fluctuations in renewable energy. So if you look at our close neighbors, for example, the south of the UK or the Netherlands, you see that there is still a quite high number. But going a little bit further to Denmark, Norway, etc., there you actually see that the numbers decrease, and so they can help us level out the national supply dips. And so there, overall Europe, if we compare to Belgium, we can actually reduce the need for flexibility by 50% when having these interconnections. So it stresses again really the importance of those interconnections to have them in the system.
Indeed, as Carsten said, interconnectors have a dual role to play. We need them to exchange renewables between countries, but also to level out fluctuation that mainly come from wind. We now have another statement from Professor and energy expert Ronnie Belmans, founder of the Flemish Research Institute Energyville, to share with you.
The interconnection is needed not only in the traditional way for balancing and exchanging flows, but also because we need a mixture of renewable resources. If we would only have sun or wind, it will be not possible to have it balanced. The seasonal variations of sun and wind are very much different, and a very well interconnected grid, bringing it all together, sun, wind, but do not forget hydro and maybe some geothermal, that will bring a stable European system to come along. And don't forget, we will need somewhere some molecules to fill up those final gaps that will be left over. And they will be used to shortly fill the gaps to bring the system into a constant equilibrium.
Thank you to Ronnie Belmans for his thoughts. So we have discussed the long term and the midterm. Paul, what about the daily fluctuations?
Yeah, we'll see a lot of daily fluctuations in the future power system, mainly because of the day-night cycle of solar power. But new electric consumers can actually address these fluctuations. Electric vehicles, heat pumps, but also industrial flexibility can help us there. And in our study, we analyzed 2 scenarios, one with low flexibility and one with high flexibility from end users and industry. And if you look at the orange bubbles here, which show the number or the share of days where you have both an oversupply in some hours, but also in other hours an undersupply of electricity, you can see that this share of days during the year is strongly decreased with flexibility by 90% even. Yeah, end users and industrial flexibility is really important to cope with these fluctuations, but we also need digitalization to actually enable this potential.
Interesting, thank you. We will now move from flexibility to the last dimension, adequacy. What about moments of stress? In Germany, they call that Dunkelflaute. These are periods of up to several weeks with no wind or sun. How can we cope with these in a renewable system? Carsten, can you help us out on that one?
Yes, of course. And there we also have a very important finding. So what we see is that independently of the amount of interconnectors and short-term flexibility that you can activate in the end, there will still be a need for dispatchable capacity in the energy system to guarantee adequacy. Of course, the amount of capacity that's needed depends on what level of interconnectors and short-term flexibility is available. So this can vary between 240 and 400 gigawatts. And so it's very important also in the run-up towards 2050 to continuously monitor the security of supply to really guarantee that there is enough dispatchable generation available to always have sufficient energy to cover the demand.
Enough available, you say, but will we need them often?
Actually, yeah, when you have sufficient interconnectors, when you have the flexibility, they only have a limited number of running hours. They will only be used in situations that are scarce, that are rare, mainly in winter, actually, when the sun is not shining too much, but also when there is not much wind over several days, then you will need them. But again, with the right renewable mix, you don't need them to run all winter.
Carsten, can you say something about the technology behind them?
Yeah, so over the coming decade, new but also existing thermal power plants will take up this role of dispatchable generation in the energy system. However, the more we evolve towards a decarbonized society with the RES expansion, their running hours and thus also their CO2 emissions will become more and more limited. So this, first of all, stresses again the importance of renewable expansion as a first priority. It's only in a second step, when we also want to decarbonize those capacities themselves, that we need to make a choice about their future technology. And so there are different technologies that can fill in this gap. We have hydrogen-fired gas turbines, also fuel cells, for example, could fill up this role. And all of these different technologies have a varying level of maturity. However, what we do see new technologies can appear. What we do see in the end is that low investment costs will probably be best suited in order to fill up this role as dispatchable capacities because they will have quite low running hours. It's anyway very important to assure the adequacy in the energy system towards 2050.
Sounds very logical. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Carsten. It is time now for the next part of the program. We have discussed the key insights on energy balance, on flexibility, and on adequacy. So it's time to join our guests for some reactions. Marlon, over to you again.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. Yes, and someone who knows everything about managing flexibility in a renewable system is Devrim Shelal, the CEO of Krakenflex. Nice to have you here. Krakenflex is the flexibility platform that belongs to Octopus Energy Group. And 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, Elia Group and Octopus Energy signed an agreement to collaborate on consumer-centric flexibility services to facilitate the energy transition. The agreement was signed during COP26 in Glasgow. Well, what's your main takeaway so far, Mr. Chelal?
Thank you, Marlon. Firstly, I would like to thank the Elia Group for this report. It's robust, insightful, but most important, with very clear messages and call to action for policymakers, investors, and developers of renewable generation. My biggest stake is the consumer centricity, because consumers are often the most overlooked stakeholder within the energy system. We always assume that they're not interested in engaging the system. But at Octopus Energy in the UK, we know that not to be true. Our consumers on smart tariffs are able to shift 500 megawatts of electricity consumption from peak to off-peak hours, effectively following renewable generation for cheaper and greener electrons. We're able to do that today with a very small group of customers. Imagine in the future, especially in the high electrification scenario of 70% more consumption, we're going to have millions of electric vehicles, heat pumps, and storage. Imagine what consumers can do and how much load they can shift around. And what I like about this is what we see as the challenge with technology and digitization becomes the solution itself.
Well, thank you very much for these insights, Devrim. Now we have to move around here a little bit. I would like you to have a seat in our audience behind us, and I would like to welcome the next two guests here in my little speaker's corner. So Peter Zadora and Jan van der Stertegem. Just feel free, feel comfortable. And we will disinfect the microphones. Just spare with us 1 minute. I may introduce to you Peter Zadora from the materials technology company Umicore and Jan van Stertegem from the construction group Basics. Jan, whenever the microphones are ready, I would like to start with you. What is needed actually to unlock the flexibility of buildings?
Maybe just a few words. I think the construction industry over the last 20 years have done a tremendous effort to reduce the energy consumption in buildings, and I think we can be proud in Belgium and in Brussels specifically of the work we have done at the European level to achieve that, and I think that's a success story. But now comes a new challenge, and that is how to have more renewables, how to have more green molecules in the buildings. And I think the report of Elia, which was already discussed, gives a lot of insight in what we can do as a sector to do that. It's important to know that our industry is responsible for about 40% of the carbon emissions worldwide. 30% are operational. That means in the use of the building, during the use of the building. So we are a big contributor. So we are also a sector that can give a lot of solutions, I would say. And I think the last topic which was touched, which is flexibility, where we go from 44% to 4% in the slide which was shown. That's where we as a sector can have a lot of impact. And what we need for that is a good framework, legal framework. It's access to the energy system, something which Elia is working on quite heavily. And it's a lot of ambition and guts. And we are a very tangible sector, the construction. We just need to do it. That's the thing we need to do. We have the technology, just do it.
Thank you. Peter, in your quest for maximum decarbonization, what elements from our key insights will you take away today?
Well, in June, we communicated a very ambitious strategy at Umicore, Let's Go for Zero, where by 2035 already we want to reach carbon net zero in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So for us, what I keep in mind is that we need a lot of renewable electricity for that. And also in our plan to reduce our Scope 2, we need that. So I welcome that, and I welcome that message. And we should keep on repeating those messages. For our Scope 1, which is also very challenging, is that we need green molecules. We're looking into electrification, we're looking into our industrial processes and equipments. However, we need to develop them. We need to develop technology, and this takes a long time. You cannot do this in 5 years. And also a final point that I want to take away is that we need to collaborate, not only in Belgium, not only across regions, with Germany, with our neighboring countries, but in Europe as well, because we cannot do it alone in Belgium.
Okay, well, some interesting reactions from our guests. Thank you, Devrim, once again. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Jan. Well, it's now time to go back to the stage to join Marlene again.
We have heard some very interesting insights about the European energy system in 2050, but what about our home countries, Belgium and Germany? Our next speaker will be able to provide us with more details about this. I'm pleased to welcome Stefan Kapferer, CEO of 50 Hertz, on stage. Stefan Stefan Kapferer, welcome. I would like to come back to a chart that was shared during the presentation of our experts earlier today. Both Belgium or, can we see the chart? Yes. Both Belgium and Germany, as you can see here in orange, they don't have enough own renewable energy sources. What would that mean? First zoom on Germany. What would that mean for Germany towards 2050?
Yeah, let's take the opportunity, Marlene, to link our insights for Europe with the home countries, Belgium and Germany. And when we look at Germany, the first positive message is Germany will be able to cover its electricity demand, direct electricity demand by domestic RES capacities. That's good news. Of course, we will need additional capacities of renewable energy generation abroad to cover our demand for green molecules in the future. But that in our domestic areas we can cover the direct electricity demand is a good news. Mm-hmm. But of course, we have to quadruple the share of renewables. So at the moment, it is at least only a little part of it we have established as a generation capacity of renewables in Germany. And we all know Germany wants to become climate neutral till 2045, so only 23 more years to go.
Yeah, that's 5 years earlier than the rest of Europe. We don't have a new German government yet. It will come mid-December. What would you recommend to them concerning, for instance, the energy mix?
Yeah, first of all, we would recommend acceleration of processes. We need more speed when we talk about investment in energy infrastructure. We need more speed when we talk about investments in generation capacities of renewable energies. But of course, we need also the right balance between the different options of renewable energies. Mm-hmm. We have heard about wind in the last few years. So if this will go on in the next decade, it's very clear we need higher ambitions in offshore wind. And that's one reason why 50 Hertz is so engaged in a project which was mentioned by Thomas Eggerbo from Energinet earlier today, the Bornholm Energy Island. I think we will need more international cooperation when we talk about offshore projects in the future.
Yeah. This is the electricity supply in 2050 in Germany. Let's put the graphic from Belgium next to it. It's a completely different story. If you see the non-domestics, it's nearly half of our energy supply. What should Belgium do?
Yeah, it's obviously a much higher challenge here in Belgium because, like you mentioned it, Marlene, the situation is different to Germany. Only to cover the electricity demand for direct electrification is much more challenging. It's only part of it, half of it. So you need additional international cooperation. And one more topic is relevant for us. Belgium is a densely populated country. Mm-hmm. Also, the sea area we can use for offshore wind is limited in Belgium. So we will see a lot of investment in solar capacities, which is, of course, good news. But we know to balance the system, we will also need additional wind capacities abroad.
Yeah, and our potential on the Belgian coast is limited. So we need to invest in more collaborations towards the further North Sea.
Yeah, of course, we have partners in the North Sea. Neighboring countries like the UK, like Norway, and Elia Group is very experienced in having these kind of partnerships with the UK and Norway. So we will need this situation that they have an abundance of renewable energy resources when we talk about offshore wind, and we'll use it for the Belgian territories.
Okay, thank you, Stefan, for sharing the insights on Belgium and Germany. We'll bring them up later again when we talk to the Belgian Minister of Energy later on this show, Tine van der Straten. Thank you, Stefan. And meanwhile, I can see that Marlon has been joined by another last guest.
Yes, thank you, Marleen. And I'm honored to have Peter Wittek here with me in the Speaker's Corner. Peter Wittek, who acted as the leader of the Belgian delegation at COP26 in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago. Well, Peter, what are your thoughts about Elia's group vision for realizing climate neutrality by 2050?
Yes, thanks first for having me here to Elia, and congratulations. That's a first thought on this study, which is really very timely indeed. At Glasgow, during the COP, basically we confirmed the road ahead towards not exceeding 1.5 degrees in terms of temperature rise, which entails going net zero by the mid-century. So that has now been established or re-established, reaffirmed on the international level. We know, of course, we heard about the Fit for 55 package, that the European Union is well ahead of that curve. And we're rolling out now the legislation that is needed to bring Europe to this climate neutrality. Now the world has to be on as well. But it's very reassuring to see that important actors in the energy system, such as Elia, are even ahead of that curve and are already looking at what changes are needed in the real world, as we refer to the normal world in these international negotiations. We've been doing that as an administration for a couple of years, also from a broader perspective, looking at how Belgium can become, on the national level, from a national perspective, how Belgium can become climate neutral, looking at the energy system, but also looking broader at mobility, at land use, etc. And our findings are very largely consistent with what we see in Elia's study, in terms of the possibility to get to 100% renewables, the crucial role of electrification in that, and many other more aspects. But as I said, we have to look at it from a broader perspective as well, not only the energy system. But this is very reassuring, basically, that even though European policy is still to be put in place somewhere by the end of next year, we hope that the actors in the real world are already taking action.
Well, thank you very much for these insights, for these fruitful insights, Peter Wittuk. And that was our last guest for today from the Speaker's Corner. Back to you, Marleen.
Chris Peters is back on stage. Chris, we discussed already the key insights, but a very important part of this study is the focus points. What do we have to do on the road to 2050? We have 4 focus points, so I suggest that we run over them one by one. And the first one is ensure an efficient use of renewable energy sources potential. What needs to be done?
Well, this is a perspective from Europe that we see. So what we see today is, as the map that was shown twice, once in the beginning of the study and once while Stefan was here, you see clearly that countries like Belgium and Germany will be short in terms of renewable energy, and they will have to tap into the potential that is in other countries. And so we need to make sure that we build those partnerships. Yeah, you saw typically that to the north there are many countries that have an access of renewable energy. You see as well to the south that you have some, and those partnerships need to be built early so that we agree on the way how that renewable energy can be used for the shortness that we have in those other countries. And then once that is done, of course, we need to make sure that we make this physically work. It's not about just having the idea that it's there, it needs to be connected physically to our countries, and therefore you need to have interconnectors. But the good news, of course, of those interconnectors, as we said, is they're not only there to import this energy, is also there to balance the system better in the medium-term horizon, because they play this role of being dispatchable between the different kind of wind zones that we have, and therefore reduce the investments that we have to do in the country for dispatchable capacity.
Yeah, so the ambition is there, we need partnerships, we need more interconnectors, but how do you put this then in practice?
Well, what we see today is that Europe has been developing its offshore potential mainly by a logic of having auctioning around wind farms and having them with radial connections connected. Within Elia Group, we are the first that has actually built a hybrid interconnector, but it was actually built the other way around. We first had the wind farms and now we connected them together to make an interconnector. What we need to do for the future, and most studies agree on that, is that we need more of those hybrid interconnectors, and we will have also a need of more energy hubs like the Bornholm Energy Island, like the islands that we will build at the North Sea, both in Denmark and in Belgium. And so you have to make sure that those come first, and that they make it easier for wind farms to connect, that they also create a space that is attractive for investment, that is de-risked on that perspective, and they know for sure where their energy can go to. That is one thing that we for sure need to get right. Second thing, of course, if you look at the North Sea, then you see it's a huge potential in terms of energy. But the problem is, of course, that recently UK stepped out of Europe. Norway always have been a friendly country, but at the borders of Europe. So we need to make sure that we reinforce or relationships with those countries because they're really long in terms of energy, and they can benefit from the flexibility that a large continent that Europe can offer to them as well.
Yeah. We discussed the framework within Europe for the green electrons, but what about the green molecules?
Well, the green molecules actually goes even beyond that. Yeah? We will need a lot of green molecules. So don't get us wrong when we talk about electrification. There will be a need of a massive amount of green molecules, even more than you need electrons if you look at the study result that we have. But what we see, of course, is given this efficiency that you see at the electrification side, you need to look outside of the European borders to find partnerships as well there. So we will produce some of them, pilot scale, we will have some scale of hydrolyzers in Europe, but we need to have a massive amount of molecules coming from abroad. And so we need to make sure that we get those partnerships developed already early so that we can secure the security of supply in those countries. Second thing that we need to do over there is what we see is that people start to revisit their supply chain, because we talk about hydrogen, but hydrogen is not the easiest one to transport. So a lot can be done by ammonia, by methanol, so by different forms of molecules that we'll bring into our supply chains. And so we have to look at that. How does that work? And what is the kind of infrastructure that we will need to ensure that this is going to happen?
Yeah. That was the first focus point. Let's move to the second one, and the message there is triple the speed of RES expansion. The ambition is there again, but what we see in practice are long procedures in permitting. How you don't see this acceleration really happening today. How can we cope with this?
Well, that is something that I have already mentioned several times when I was on conferences. Yeah, if we see the massive challenge that we have, you really need to accelerate in a way that we've never seen. As I said, like COVID-like measures in terms of permitting. We need to reduce permitting by a factor of 2. Today, if we want to build a line, it takes us about 10 years, the permitting procedures, sometimes even more, and then we build it in 2 or 3 years. If you see the amount of infrastructure that we will need to ensure that this green energy gets to the consumer in form of an electron, in form of a green molecule, we need to have those permit procedures really cut by half, and we have to look at the ways how we're going to do that. Second thing that we have to make sure is we said this whole thing about seasonality. This is not a simple finding. If we can manage the mix right, so we can actually avoid to have a huge cost of flexibility in the long run with storage, with all the disadvantages that we could have. And so if we can avoid that, that is important. That means that on the one hand, multiplying the speed of renewable development with a factor of 3 is something that we need to achieve. So we need to go all in making that happen. But what you then will see, of course, if you push very hard on 2 things that are actually relatively easier, solar PV, offshore wind, likely onshore will actually be behind. And so we have to have a specific focus to ensure that onshore wind can as well develop at that speed, because each thing you don't develop in onshore wind, you will have to replace by offshore wind. And so there is, of course, a cost efficiency level in that as well.
Yeah, like Stefan said. Focus point 3 is about flexibility, and the message here is electrify, electrify now. What do we mean by this?
Well, electrification brings a double win. Many of the stakeholders that we had today in this room already, let's say, confirmed that in all of the studies that you see, by if you can electrify certain appliances, you really can reduce the amount of energy that you need. A heat pump is a very efficient appliance. Electrical mobility is as well a very efficient appliance. Second win that you will have is as well on the side of conversion. If you would actually have first producing molecules, then go back to electricity, you actually lose quite an amount of energy. Now we saw energy is scarce, so we have to be careful about the way how we do that. And then, of course, the last one is we need that flexibility, especially for the short cycle, for the day cycle, for the week cycle. We need that flexibility that is sitting in batteries, that's sitting in the moment that you use your heat pump.
Yeah, it's a double win, you just said. It's urgent. So how can we make it happen?
Well, we have discussed this already many times at Elia. We think that we need a new market design. Partnerships that, like the one that we have with Octopus, is really to further understand that from both sides. They look at the commercial side, are very progressive in that. We look at the system side. How can we facilitate in making these things happen? And so you need to have a real market design that gives the incentives that people adapt their behavior to the system status. Today you see that most of the signals that you see are signals to maximize auto consumption. But actually what you need is not only that you optimize vis-a-vis your your own solar PV, but you optimize vis-a-vis the system, and that you then as well take into account the wind availability or the solar availability at another location than the one that is yours, and that is going to happen by a market design. And of course, when you want to react, you need to have signals, you need to have digitalization, and so a lot of effort needs to be made on digitalization, and also some standards need to come over there, because what we see today is already that, for instance, in the mobility sector, it doesn't seem to be a priority to do smart charging. If you look at the heat pumps, a lot of those heat pump manufacturers are still in the early stage, so we need to accelerate as well on that level of digitalization of all the sectors that start to electrify, that they take into account right away digitalization as an element of their development.
Yeah, more details on electrification can be found in the report, but let's go to the last focus point, and that's avoid lock-in effects for efficient decarbonization. Avoid lock-in effects. What do we mean by this?
Well, there are two dimensions to that. As we have seen, we are renewable short. And so if we would now massively go to invest into hydrolyzers, except already from the fact that it is still something which is very costly today, but if you would do that massively in Europe, you would consume those electrons in a way that is not efficient. Yeah? So you would still need those electrons later on for electrified appliances, and so you need to avoid that you have a too far built out of hydrolyzers in Europe. You need to focus much more on building these kind of molecule hubs, like we have actually today already in Belgium and in Germany. Countries that are short are actually very, very well positioned to make that happen, that they became the roundabout where you have this international trade coming in of molecules. Second thing is, of course, in appliances that will have a long life cycle. If you look at heating in buildings, you need to start early by electrifying them and by fully electrifying them, that you avoid that people invest in a certain technology that is not fully decarbonized or that is more expensive in the long run, and that they will actually have to sustain it for another 20 to 40 years, which is actually too long, and we don't have that time.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for sharing the 4 focus points of the study with us. We went over a lot of points. There is a lot to focus on. We would have liked to present this to the Belgian and the German Minister of Energy, but unfortunately Germany is still in the middle of negotiations for a new government. But we have a reaction from the Belgian Energy Minister. Last night, Tine van der Straten was here in the studio for a live on tape, and let's have a look on this. Welcome, Tine van der Straten. On your way to the studio, you told us that you got a glimpse into the vision paper of Elia. As a policymaker, what are your thoughts about the key findings and the focus points that we bring forward?
Most important focus point for me is that climate neutrality by 2050 and 100% renewable energy future is a can-do, and that we must achieve this. It will not be easy, and it is also what the report shows, that we have obstacles that we have to overcome, but that we can absolutely do this. And that this will be a combination of green electricity, a lot of green electricity, not only in Belgium, not only domestically, but also abroad, in combination with green molecules. And that if we bring these together, that we can see for us a bright future with 100% renewable energy.
Yeah, one of the points that we bring forward in the study is that we need partnerships for the RES expansion. But what about partnerships for the green molecules? What is the strategy from the Belgian government in this regard?
The energy transition is based on collaboration and on partnerships. We are a small country and we don't have an abundance of natural resources, but we are situated in the heart of Europe and at an energy crossroads. And already today we are very well interconnected with our neighbors, and both with regard to electricity, also with regard to molecules. And this position we can now reinforce also with regard to green molecules, which will be an integral part of the puzzle that we have to make between now and 2050. And we have published a few weeks ago the hydrogen vision and strategy for Belgium, and for which the pillars are, on the one side, import hub and transit hub, becoming a leader in this technology, but also international collaboration.
Yeah. And if you want to become the hub, you need the ports, of course. On the import of the green molecules, we have a statement from the Port of Antwerp from Jacques van der Meren.
The reliability and comfort of a robust and flexible energy system that complements local production of green energy with the import of renewable molecules is needed to cover Europe's future energy need in a cost-efficient way. Hydrogen offers the answer by allowing long-distance transport of large volumes exactly where and when consumers need it. The presence of Europe's largest seaports, the ideal energy crossroads, with state-of-the-art infrastructure and assets, gives us the responsibility to act now and to prepare the energy future.
Yeah, we have to act now. We talked a lot in the study about the RES acceleration, but for this, of course, you need a framework, an investment framework. You need also the infrastructure. You already talked about the blockers. How can we remove the obstacles that we are seeing today?
The most important thing that we as policymakers can provide is a very clear framework, and also be very clear on the targets we want to achieve. And I like to always use the quote of Seneca, if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. And we know our port. Our port is climate neutrality by 2050, 100% renewable energy, and this will guide the market to accelerate. Also, as Belgium and in our federal government, we have a strong appetite for innovation and also for being a pioneer. We have seen this, that we can do this for offshore wind. We are today the 5th country worldwide. We will be building the first energy island in the North Sea. It will be a Belgian energy island. So we can pioneer in offshore wind, and we can do the same thing for hydrogen. And acceleration is key, and that means that at the policy level we need to de-risk projects. It's about a clear framework. It's also about investment schemes. It's about market revenues. It's about, for example, two-sided contracts for difference. We have to. The market does not always deliver, nor on adequacy, security of supply, nor on green energy. And so that's a responsibility that we as policymakers need to take, to be aware of, and to also be able to make bold policy choices.
Mm-hmm. Let's listen to a next statement. We have an interesting statement from Christian Ruby from Electric, the Federation of the European Electrical Industry, about the new ways of thinking that indeed is necessary if it has to come to investments.
One of the key challenges we're looking at is to add very, very big amounts of generation capacity over the next decade or two. We need to think new to make that happen. We need to accelerate offshore deployment. We need to have a lot of new wind turbines and solar panels onshore, and we need dispatchable plants to support that whole thing. We need to think new to make that happen at this pace that is now needed. We need to review the permitting rules that are currently in place and slowing down deployment. We need to take a fresh look at how to involve local communities and make sure we get the public acceptance. And we need to take a fresh look at incentives, for instance, for farmers, to see how we could get them to accept to make their lands available for additional capacity. All this requires reviews of the current legislative frameworks, and that's something we're looking into in Electric.
Yeah, you talked already about the big ambitions that we have, but do you agree with Christian Ruby that he is saying, yeah, we need a new way of thinking about the permit procedures?
We need, in any case, a new way of thinking. That's also what Glasgow was about, to keep 1.5 alive, the commitment from the Paris Climate Agreement. And therefore we need, as Christian Ruby said, mass investments in renewable energy, also in renewable molecules. And the new way of thinking needs to be done at the technical level, as he said, permitting procedures, but also from another point of view. Also something he mentioned is, how can we involve our citizens? How can we involve our citizens in this huge revolution that we are going to see the next 2 decades? We see a lot of public resistance, that's true. It's true also in our own country. But we also see that there are big investments are being supported or led also by citizens. So that's why, for example, that we have a bill ready for being sent to Parliament about how our Belgian citizens can become a co-owner of offshore wind turbines. Yes, we need to be a new way of thinking. It also means that we need to be agile also as policymakers, and that we have to be able to review on a constant basis our policies, not to change them. What we have seen the last 20 years with the stop-and-go policy, but in the direction that we are heading, climate neutrality by 2050, that all the steps we take are in that direction, and that we have to move very quickly.
Okay, thank you, Tine van der Straat. And these are very exciting times for a Minister of Energy. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are nearing the end of this live stream event, and the last words are for you, Chris. Now that we published the study, what is the next step?
Well, as I can imagine that people say with these kind of insights, how did Elia get to these kind of insights? I have many questions, maybe some of things are not clear. I have to be quite proud on the team that delivered it. They used really, let's say, very interesting analysis methods that they've done. They did this in collaboration with universities. Things like Fourier analysis was for the first time applied to our sector, supported by academics. So I'm really proud about the level of study and depth that we have done in this study. And of course, we want to share this, as we always have done with our studies. We share them, and so therefore, first thing that we will do is the 14th of December, we will have 2 specific workshops on that. One in Germany with 50 Hertz, where we go to do that in the morning, and one in the afternoon. It will be a Teams meeting, so a lot of people can participate to that. And so that's the moment where people, after they have, of course, gone through our documents and read it and done it, that we can have an interactive session and that people can really get the understanding on the analysis. Or experts will be there. They will be challenged, they will talk with everybody, and that's actually the intention of this kind of study, of course, that we get a dialogue ongoing, that we have a debate around it, and that people say, I like this, I don't like this, how did you get to that? That's really what we want to create. So that's really what we want to get. And so 14th of December, put it in your agenda. That's the real moment when you can have a direct interaction with our experts on this.
Yeah, more information can be found on the website. It's a tradition. In November, Elia Group always comes with a new study. For next year, do you have already some ideas of what we would like to bring forward?
I know that everybody's waiting for this. Even my team is waiting for this moment. And I had a good moment in the shower this morning, so I came up with a good idea, I think. And so when we see the study, we always have in our study this balance between macro studies like the vertical system, the horizontal system, and then in-depth studies. For instance, in the vertical system, we looked into mobility. Now we have this macro system, macro study about the roadmap to net zero. What we want now to do is to zoom in on the industry side of that. So we want to zoom in on 3 specific use cases where we really want to understand how does net zero looks like, and of course, especially for our side, understanding what that means in an evolving relationship with our network and our system, so that we can do our job and prepare for that. And so the 3 industry dimensions that we want to look at is, first of all, we want to look at data centers. Data centers use massive amounts of energy. We get more and more of them installed in our network these days. It's a lot of, let's say, almost baseload kind of capacity. And we see that those companies are seeking for, how can I fully decarbonize? How can I even decarbonize in a way of being at any single moment decarbonized? So that's something that we want to zoom in. We want to look at the large, heavy, typical traditional industries, chemicals, steel, those kind of industries, cement, where you say like they have a huge challenge. It will not be a challenge of electricity only, it will be more about molecules, but also they will electrify some of these things, and some of the former baseload might change over time, and we might have to see how we handle that and how their relationship with our network will change over different plans, maybe complementing each other into that, so the better understanding that I mentioned. And then lastly, more into the kind of service sector, a logistics/retail company with multiple sites. It says like, I have solar PV, I have refrigerators, I have maybe that I want to offer services in terms of charging to cars of my clients. I have a fleet. How do I manage that overall? So that are the 3 focus points that we want to have. And of course, this is then as well an invitation to contact us if you are a company that is fulfilling one of those promises. Then talk with us, because we will start early next year on developing the basis of that study.
Okay, we had some representatives from the industry here in the show. I'm sure that they can talk to Chris later on. Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, give him an applause. So, Marlon, Marie-Laure, I think we have had everything. Technically, it went well. I have a good feeling about the show. How do you?
Yeah, definitely. It was quite an interesting morning, I would say, also for the audience, and I hope also for our guests that watch the live stream. Yes. In this regard, yet another round of applause for the guests I was talking to. Thank you very much.
Well, I would like to thank my two guests as well then, Paul and Carsten. Thank you. I can imagine it was very difficult to summarize all that work of you and all your colleagues in just a presentation of 15, 20 minutes. Thank you for keeping it short and sharp. An applause for them as well, please.
Yeah, what now remains, ladies and gentlemen, is to thank you for joining us both from your workplaces and also here in the studio. The complete study is now available on our website. I wish you a nice day and stay safe. How late is it?